Greetings, salutations, respect, and love. I'm Scott, you're in the Prog Corner. Today we're talking about bands influenced by the mighty King Crimson. And I guess the question that really needs to be asked is there a band that was not influenced by King Crimson, particularly within the prog subgenre? Every band, let's be honest, every single band has been influenced in one way or another by the mighty King Crimson. They themselves were influenced by the Moody Blues, absolutely. They bought their first Mellotron from Mike Pender and the Moody Blues. Procol Harum was definitely an early influence. Jimi Hendrix definitely influenced the early sound of King Crimson, and the great Bela Bartok, absolutely. The cover art of that first album, man. Even if you never heard a single note, you knew something was afoot in 1969 when that thing came out. Is it the first prog album? I don't know, but the intent of In the Court of the Crimson King was certainly different than any other band's intentions. They were actually trying to create something brand new, and that's really exciting. They've spawned a whole lot of different things, not least of which Greg Lake left King Crimson to form Emerson, Lake and Palmer. You had Boz leaving the band and forming Bad Company. You had Bill and John Wetton forming UK. You had Asia, all these different things that originated from King Crimson. You had Kurt Cobain of Nirvana, who was a big avowed fan of Red in particular. What about Opeth? Are they King Crimson influence? Yeah, I didn't put them on my list, but they most certainly are. The Mars Volta, definitely. Roxy Music back in the day. Steven Wilson, for sure. All that Porcupine Tree stuff and his solo stuff definitely owes a debt to King Crimson. But I've got here in my hand the top 12 bands under the influence of the mighty Crimson. And clocking in at number 12 from Sweden is Anglagard. One of the most important third wave bands, really helped stir the prog movement back up in the 90s. I'm going to spotlight their debut album, Hybris, from 1992. Like I said, these guys are Scandinavian, so that's that dark Scando prog. And when that flute kicks in from Anna Holmgren, you definitely think you're listening to a new version of the Crimson. At number 11, let's go with Dream Theater. Yeah, you listen to Dream Theater, they sound more metal, but the heavier end of the spectrum, also very much influenced by King Crimson. Mike Portnoy was a gigantic fan and lists Bill Bruford as one of his biggest influences. And on the album Black Clouds and Silver Linings in 2009, which was the last album with Portnoy, they had a bonus disc which included Lark's Tongues and Aspect Part 2. So obviously the mighty Crimson had a little something to do with the formation and the sound of Dream Theater at number 10. This one's a bit tenuous. I understand that Graaf Generator were contemporaries of King Crimson. In fact, they were formed in 1967, even though the first album didn't come out in 69. Was King Crimson influenced by Graaf Generator or the other way around? Well, once In the Court of the Crimson King came out, it was a clarion call for all prog rockers and progressive music thinkers, including Peter Hamill. And if you listen to Pawn Hearts, particularly Plague of Lighthouse Keepers, Robert Fripp is there playing along. And there's a reason why, because there's so much camaraderie and respect between the two. I do hear some similarities, the darkness, some of the timbres of Graaf Generator do mirror a little bit of King Crimson. It's a different animal, but definitely influenced by them. At number 9, a band that was definitely influenced by King Crimson, and they admit it right up front. It's Primus. Les Claypool and Lure Lalonde, both are definitely disciples of the mighty Crimson. I'm going to spotlight their second album, Sailing the Seas of Cheese, from 1991. Really great. They're a lot funkier, so this is kind of like your funky Crimson, I guess. Les Claypool recently has done a couple albums with Sean Lennon under the name the Claypool, Lennon, Delirium, and they've covered 21st Century Schizoid Man, and those two albums from them definitely sound prog to me. So yeah, Primus at number 9. At number 8, let's go to Italy with PFM. A lot of those Italian bands, man, they were definitely influenced by King Crimson. Some of them more than others. But when I first heard PFM, I really was transported to those early Crimson albums, particularly the first two, with the mellotrons and everything, the instrumentation and just the intention of progressive music. Absolutely there in PFM. And I'm spotlighting their debut album, Storia di un Minuto, from 1972. But I could have gone with the second one, Per Amico 2. They both have a whole bunch of Crimson in their DNA. Just love it at number 7. Another classic band, definitely influenced by King Crimson, is none other than Genesis. In fact, Tony Banks bought his first Mellotron from Robert Fripp, so that connection was there very early on. And the word goes that when they were recording their second album, Trespass, they had a poster in the Court of the Crimson King up in the studio to remind them the direction that they were trying to go in, and you hear definite Crimson influences all over the early Genesis sound. At number 6, we're going to South America and Bubu. In 1978, this crazy band of Argentinians dropped their one and only album called Annabellis. Yeah, they did come up with a second album a few years ago, which is really good. But this album totally sounds like our mighty Crimson. There's 3 songs. They're all 9 minutes or longer, and it just goes through all this dark territory, just like Crimson does. Just fantastic. If you haven't heard Bubu, if you're a fan of King Crimson, you know what to do. At number 5, we're going back to the modern era here with Black Midi. These guys are absolutely influenced by King Crimson. Their drummer, Morgan Simpson, is actually friends with Bill Bruford, and Bruford gave Black Midi and Morgan Simpson his stamp of approval. Hey, man, that's good enough for me. Black Midi is definitely in line, in that long line. You can definitely see that through line from In the Court of the Crimson King all the way through to all 3 of Black Midi's albums. I'm spotlighting their first one, Schlagenheim, but I could have done Cavalcades or Hellfire. All 3 Black Midi albums are deeply indebted to the mighty King Crimson at number 4. How about Yes? Well, absolutely. If you listen to Heart of the Sunrise off Fragile, the word is that was basically their homage to 21st Century Schizoid Man. And there's those stories where King Crimson was performing at the Marquee Club, and Bill Bruford, John Anderson, and Chris Squire popped in to see them, and they were all like shaking their heads saying, dude, we need to practice, man. We're not good enough. And years later, Bruford got to enjoy his time in King Crimson playing some of those songs. John Anderson also sang on Lizard. So there's been connections between those two bands from the very outset. And we cannot underestimate the influence King Crimson had on even giants of the genre like Yes and Genesis. At number 3, this one should come as absolutely no surprise. It is a King Crimson spin-off band. It's called UK. Oh, yeah, you know who these guys are. We're really going to be talking about the first album here. Definitely had more of a Crimson influence than the second album, primarily because Bill Bruford is there. John Wetton is there. 2 guys that were in Crimson during the 70s, Larks, Tongues, and Aspects, Starless and Bible Black and Red era. So a lot of that did rub off, and there are some Crimson sounds throughout both UK albums. Apparently, Bill and John did talk to Robert about joining the band. I guess they even talked to Rick Wakeman about joining the band, but they ended up rounding out their lineup with Alan Holdsworth and Eddie Jobson. Phenomenal. I just love UK. At number 2, another one that should surprise absolutely no one. The band a lot of people talk about as the descendants of King Crimson. It's Tool, Maynard James Keenan and his crew. Danny Carey, the drummer, is a avowed fan of King Crimson. They let their Crimson flag fly whenever they want to. They even toured with King Crimson back in '01. And I remember when I got La Turles way back in the day, like in '01 or '02 or whatever, the first thing I thought of was, man, these guys sound like a dark, modern version of King Crimson. Even Adam Jones' guitar playing sometimes sounds a little bit like a cross between Adrian Belew and Robert Fripp. Yeah, Tool definitely has plenty of King Crimson DNA running through their music, but there can only be number one, boys and girls, cats and kittens. The number one King Crimson influence band, straight out of Sweden. It's Anekdoten, and I am going to spotlight their debut album from 1993 called Vermod. And if you like Mellotron and you like that early King Crimson sound, the closest thing I've ever heard to it is Anekdoten. Yeah, they're not total ripoffs. They're not a clone band or anything like that, but they take the sound of early King Crimson and fuse it into what they're doing with all those Mellotrons. Man, it just sounds so great. Anekdoten, my number one King Crimson influence band. But if you, like I said at the outset of this episode, every single prog band in the history of the genre owes a debt of gratitude to the mighty King Crimson, one of the greatest bands of all time. And they had so many different eras, so many different styles that sometimes it's even hard to pick out, oh, that's a Crimson thing, because they went through so many things, from the early pastoral stuff to the weird, obtrusive brass of Lizard, to the lush symphonics of Island, to the crazy improv of that middle 70s era, to the really strange interplay and time, signature craziness of Discipline Beat and Three of a Perfect Pair, and then you got the double trio stuff. I mean, so you can't really say there is a singular King Crimson sound, but there is a singular King Crimson intention, and a lot of times it's more mentally what a band is thinking about than what they're laying down on tape that really dictates whether they were influenced by the great King Crimson or not. And those are my 12. Let me know in the comments what I missed, because it's going to be endless, man. The list is going to be nonstop, but I'm very curious to hear what you guys have to say. Anyway, those are my 12 bands under the direct influence of King Crimson. I love you guys. Peace in the Middle East. God save the king. And Princess a little bit. Why not?